I still remember the chill that crept into my bones that morning, not from the November air outside, but from the words my own daughter spoke to me. On Thanksgiving, you'll eat early and alone, and stay in your room. Her voice didn't even shake. She said it calmly, as if she were talking about something ordinary, like setting the table or folding laundry. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to understand if I had heard her right. It's strange how life turns. I raised 3 children, poured my entire existence into making sure they had warmth, food, and love. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and stayed awake nights when one of them was sick. And now, in my old age, the same daughter who used to cling to my apron strings when thunder frightened her was asking me to stay away from my own family's Thanksgiving dinner. My name is Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 74 now. My hands tremble a little when I pour tea, and my knees don't let me climb the stairs without holding on to the railing. But my mind still holds every moment, every heartbreak, every scent of a time when family meant everything. And that Thanksgiving, that one sentence, changed me forever. When she said it, my daughter Claire didn't even meet my eyes. She just kept stirring something on the stove. "Mom," she continued, "it's just better this way. The house will be full, and it'll be easier if you eat girly." I wanted to ask easier for whom, but my throat was dry and my heart was heavier than I could carry. I nodded, pretending I understood, pretending I wasn't falling apart inside. It wasn't always like this between us. Claire was my youngest, my sunshine baby. When her father left, it's been nearly 40 years now, she was the one who'd wipe my tears and say, "It's okay, Mom, we'll be fine." She grew up too fast, had to, because I was too broken to protect her from life's sharp edges. I thought that bonded us. I thought the pain we shared made us closer. But as years went by, something shifted. She became distant, successful, proud, surrounded by friends who looked down on my simple ways. When she married Tom, I was happy for her. He was polite at first, a man of few words but with a quiet arrogance that I noticed only later. After their wedding, she moved to a bigger city, got busy with her career, and our calls turned from daily to weekly to, "I'll call you later, Mom." And later never came. I visited only when invited, which was rare, and when I did, I could feel it, that uncomfortable tension, as if my presence was something they tolerated, not welcomed. I never caused a scene, never complained. I'd bring homemade pies, gifts for the kids, and smiles, lots of smiles. But inside, I was slowly crumbling. That year, I had been staying with her for a few months. My small apartment's heating had broken, and Claire insisted I come stay until it was fixed. I thought maybe that meant things were getting better between us. I cooked, cleaned, folded laundry, did all the little things mothers do to feel useful. But as Thanksgiving approached, I began to sense her growing irritation. She'd sigh when I asked about dinner plans. She'd whisper with Tom in the hallway. And then came that morning. I was sitting by the window, watching the first snow dust the garden, when she walked in with that look, that mix of pity and cold distance. "Mom," she said, "I've been meaning to tell you, I think it would be better if you didn't come to dinner with everyone this year." I blinked, confused. "Better? Why, sweetheart?" She avoided my gaze. "It's just, you know how the kids get uncomfortable when you bring up old things? And Tom's parents will be here. They're very particular." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Claire, I promise I'll behave. I won't say anything that'll upset anyone." But she shook her head. "It's not that, Mom. I just think it would be simpler if you ate early, before everyone arrives. I'll bring your plate upstairs. You can watch the parade on TV. It'll be peaceful." Peaceful. That word stung worse than anything else. I smiled weakly, pretending I agreed. "Of course, honey, if that makes it easier for you." She nodded, relieved. as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. But for me, that moment carved a scar deeper than any wound I'd known. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, wondering how a mother ends up as an inconvenience in her own home. I thought of all the Thanksgivings past, the laughter, the chaos, the smell of roasted turkey filling our small kitchen, the way Claire would sit on the counter swinging her legs, helping me mash potatoes. And now all that warmth was gone, replaced by silence and closed doors. I told myself maybe she was just stressed, that maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded, but deep down, I knew. The way her voice lacked hesitation, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. She had planned this. Morning came, and I made myself some tea. She was already up, bustling around the kitchen, humming. I tried to smile, but it felt unnatural. I wanted to tell her I'd changed my mind, that I'd like to sit at the table with everyone, even if it made them uncomfortable. But then I saw how content she looked, free, as if a shadow had lifted now that I was quietly accepting her decision. So I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet. By noon, the house smelled of cinnamon, butter, and roasted turkey. I could hear laughter from the backyard where her kids were playing. I peeked out once, but when her youngest saw me and shouted, "Grandma's watching," Claire turned sharply, forcing a smile, and said, "Sweetie, let Grandma rest, okay?" Then she shut the sliding door. That's when it hit me. I wasn't part of this family gathering. I was an outsider peeking in from behind glass. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat quietly on the bed. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there holding the small photo of her as a child, the one I kept in my locket. In it, she's smiling, missing a front tooth, her little hands covered in pie dough. I whispered to the picture, "Where did you go, my baby? Where did I lose you?" I stayed in my room for hours, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking plates downstairs. Every now and then, I caught pieces of conversation, familiar voices, unfamiliar tones. I could hear Claire's voice, lively and warm, the way she used to sound when she was around me years ago. But now, that warmth wasn't meant for me. It was for everyone else in that house. Around 2 o'clock, there was a soft knock on my door. "Mom?" Claire's voice came through, cheerful but detached. I quickly wiped the corners of my eyes, even though no tears had fallen. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, my voice barely steady. She opened the door, holding a tray, a plate of turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and a small slice of pumpkin pie. "Here you go," she said gently. "It's still warm. I thought you could eat before everyone sits down." I forced a smile. "Thank you, Claire. It looks lovely." She nodded, glanced around the room, and hesitated for a moment. I could feel there was something she wanted to say. Maybe a flicker of guilt. Maybe the shadow of love she used to show me. But instead, she just said, "Let me know if you need anything," and closed the door softly behind her. That door felt heavier than it ever had before. The moment it clicked shut, it was like a wall had been built between us, a wall I could no longer climb. I looked at the tray and felt my appetite vanish. I picked up the fork and moved the food around, pretending it was just another meal. But everything tasted bitter, even the pie. I turned on the television and tried to distract myself with the parade, the bright colors and fake smiles, but my mind kept wandering back to all the times Thanksgiving had meant something. When Claire was 6, we couldn't afford a turkey. I remember that day so vividly. It had snowed early that year and the pipes had frozen. We had no heat, no grand meal, no guests. Just the two of us sitting cross-legged on the floor, eating canned soup and laughing about how we were fancy people eating Thanksgiving stew. I remember her looking up at me and saying, "Mom, one day I'll make you the biggest turkey ever." And she did. The first Thanksgiving after she got married, she invited me over. Everything was perfect. The decorations, the golden brown turkey, the way she proudly showed me her new dishes. I had sat at the head of the table that year, surrounded by family, feeling like all the struggles had been worth it. Now, years later, I was eating alone, upstairs, from a tray like a stranger in her home. As I sat there, the laughter downstairs grew louder. I heard a toast being made, Tom's deep voice rising above the others. "To family," he said, and I froze. To family. I turned off the television, the silence in the room now deafening. My eyes wandered to my suitcase in the corner, half unpacked since I'd moved in. My heart began to whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. Maybe it was time to go. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I quietly opened my window and let the cold air in. I looked up at the stars, the same stars I used to show Claire when she was little. We'd lie on the grass outside our old house and find shapes in the night sky. "That one looks like a turkey," she'd giggle. "And that one looks like you, Mommy, round and glowing." I smiled at the memory, though my chest ached. It's funny how memories can warm you and wound you at the same time. The next morning, Claire came into my room, holding her phone. "Mom," she said, "I hope yesterday wasn't too hard for you." Her tone was casual, as if she were checking in after a doctor's appointment. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair perfectly styled, her nails painted, her face calm and composed. She was everything I had once dreamed she'd become. Strong, independent, successful. But in that moment, all I could see was the distance. "No, darling," I said softly. "It was fine. You did a wonderful job. Everyone seemed happy." She smiled faintly, relieved, and said, "Good. I just wanted to make sure." Before she could turn to leave, I added, "Claire, do you remember when you were little, how we used to stay up all night baking pies? How you'd sneak spoonfuls of filling when you thought I wasn't looking?" She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I remember." I took a breath. "Back then, you always told me Thanksgiving was your favorite because it was about being together, no matter what. Do you still believe that?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, just a flicker, and then she nodded. "Of course, Mom, but things are different now. You know how it is." And with that, she walked out. I sat on my bed for a long time after that, staring at the empty tray still sitting on my nightstand. Things are different now. Those words echoed in my head until they didn't sound like words anymore. Just a truth I had refused to face. That evening, I started packing my suitcase. I folded each piece of clothing carefully, not because I was in a hurry, but because I wanted to make peace with each memory attached to it. The scarf Claire had bought me one Christmas. The cardigan her son spilled cranberry sauce on when he was 3. Every fabric held a piece of love that still clung to me. When Claire saw me packing, her expression changed. "Mom, what are you doing?" she asked, sounding more startled than concerned. "I think it's time I go home, sweetheart. My heater's fixed, and I don't want to be in the way here." "You're not in the way," she said quickly, but her eyes told another story. I smiled. "It's okay. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Claire. You've built a life, and I'm proud of you. I really am. But I think I've been holding on to an old version of us, one that doesn't exist anymore." Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. That night, I left quietly before anyone woke up. The air was cold, and the world was silent except for the crunch of snow under my shoes. I took one last look at her house, the home filled with laughter I wasn't a part of anymore, and whispered, "Goodbye, my baby." But life, it seems, always finds a way to surprise us, because that goodbye wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of something I never saw coming. The bus ride home was quiet. Outside the window, the world looked washed out. Gray skies, leafless trees, and streets littered with the leftovers of Thanksgiving gatherings. Families returning from dinners, children in the back seats with full bellies and sleepy eyes. I watched them all as we passed, my heart aching with a kind of loneliness I hadn't felt in years. When I finally reached my small apartment, the one I had left behind when my heater broke, it felt colder than I remembered. The air inside was stale, and the silence heavy, but it was mine. I turned on the small lamp near the couch, and its warm yellow glow filled the room with a fragile sort of comfort. I unpacked slowly, putting things back exactly where they belonged. My favorite mug on the counter, the framed photo of Claire from her high school graduation on the side table. She had been so full of light that day, standing there in her cap and gown, holding her diploma high, shouting, "We did it, Mom!" I had cried then too, but they were happy tears. That night, I heated a can of soup, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere out there, I knew Claire was probably cleaning up, putting her children to bed, maybe even sitting beside her husband, laughing softly at something on TV. I hoped she was happy. That's all I had ever wanted for her. Days passed quietly after that. I tried to settle back into my old rhythm, my morning walks to the park, my afternoon tea, my evenings with my knitting needles clicking softly in my hands. But something had shifted inside me. I kept replaying her words in my mind. "You'll eat early and alone, and stay in your room." It wasn't anger that haunted me. It was sadness. Sadness that somewhere along the way, the bond between us had thinned like old thread, fragile and easy to snap. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Careful, neat. Inside was a note from my grandson, Jacob. "Grandma, I missed you at dinner. Mom said you weren't feeling well, but I know you were sad. Next time, can we sit together and make pie like we used to?" Tears filled my eyes before I could finish reading. That small note, written in uneven lines with little hearts drawn around the edges, broke me and healed me all at once. Children have a way of seeing things adults try to hide. That weekend, I baked a pie for the first time in months. Apple, just the way Jacob liked it, cinnamon heavy, crust flaky and golden. As it baked, the scent filled the apartment, wrapping around me like a memory of better days. When it was done, I sliced a piece, set it on a plate, and whispered, "For you, my little one." But before I could take a bite, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another telemarketer, but something made me pick up. "Mom?" It was Claire. Her voice was soft, hesitant. I didn't think you'd pick up." I sat down, heart thudding. "Of course I did, sweetheart. How are you?" She paused. "I'm okay. Listen, I found your scarf in the guest room, the red one. I wanted to drop it off. That's sweet of you, but you can keep it if you like. It'll keep you warm." Silence on the other end. Then she said, "Mom, Jacob's been asking about you. He wants to visit." My breath caught. "I'd love that. He's welcome any time." "I know," she said quietly. "He's been drawing pictures of you, little stick figures with curly hair." I smiled through tears. "That sounds about right." There was another long pause. I could hear her breathing, steady and deep, the kind of breath people take when they're trying not to cry. "Mom, I'm sorry," she finally said. "About Thanksgiving. About everything. I just wanted things to be easy this year, and I didn't think about how that must have felt for you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just listened to the trembling in her voice, the honesty buried beneath her guilt. I swallowed hard. "Claire, being a mother isn't about being perfect. It's about forgiving, over and over again, until love finds its way back home." She sniffed quietly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Yes, you do," I said softly. "Because I was you once. I thought I had to handle everything on my own, too, and sometimes I forgot the people who helped me get there." We stayed on the phone for a long time after that, talking about nothing and everything. Her work, the kids, my plants that refused to bloom. It wasn't a grand reunion. No tears or dramatic declarations. It was quiet, gentle, human. The following weekend, they came by. Claire, Tom, and the kids. They brought flowers, and Jacob ran straight into my arms like no time had passed at all. "Grandma, I missed you," he shouted. His little arms squeezed me so tightly I had to laugh. And there, in that moment, everything I'd been holding in, the pain, the disappointment, the loneliness, began to melt away. When Claire came up behind him, she smiled, eyes wet. "I brought your scarf," she said. I chuckled. "And I baked your favorite pie." That evening, as we all sat together around my tiny dining table, sharing that pie, I looked at my daughter and thought, maybe life doesn't always give us perfect holidays, but it gives us second chances. After they left that night, I cleaned the kitchen slowly, savoring the silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, Thanksgiving wasn't about where you ate or who was missing. It was about who found their way back. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, casting long, golden streaks across my little kitchen table. The scent of apple and cinnamon still lingered faintly in the air. I sat there with a cup of tea in my hands, my heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time since that painful Thanksgiving, I didn't wake up feeling forgotten. I kept replaying the previous evening in my mind, the laughter, the sound of Jacob's spoon clinking against his plate, the way Claire's eyes softened when she smiled. It wasn't perfect, no. There were moments when she looked away, unsure how to bridge the gap between us completely. But it was a beginning. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk to the park. It was cold, but the kind of cold that wakes you up and makes you grateful for warmth waiting back home. As I walked, I passed other families, mothers pushing strollers, couples holding hands, a few elderly people like me sitting quietly on benches. For years, I'd come here to feed the birds or simply think. But that day, I came to feel alive again. I sat down on my favorite bench by the pond. The ducks were gliding gracefully over the water, their reflections rippling beneath them. A little girl, no older than 6, ran toward them with a handful of bread, her laughter echoing through the air. Her mother followed, smiling softly, eyes filled with the same kind of love I used to carry for Claire when she was that age. I remembered those days vividly. Claire running ahead of me, her hair tied up in messy pigtails, her shoes splashing in every puddle she could find. I used to scold her, but inside I always smiled. Back then, time felt endless. I thought we'd always be that close. Her, the curious little girl, me, the proud mother who believed love alone could protect her from the world. But life doesn't stay simple, does it? It stretches and twists, pulls people in different directions until they're not sure where they belong anymore. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Mom, Jacob wants to visit again next weekend. He says he wants to learn how to make pie crusts like you." I smiled at the message. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back, "Tell him I'll have the flour ready." The next weekend, they came again. This time, Claire seemed more relaxed. She didn't hover awkwardly by the door or apologize for being late. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and said, "Okay, Mom, show me how you get that crust that flaky. My nose ends up hard as a rock." I laughed. "Because you rush it. Good things take patience." Jacob climbed onto a stool beside us, dusting flour on his tiny hands like a little chef. "Grandma, I'm ready," he said proudly. As we mixed, kneaded, and rolled the dough, I noticed how the kitchen began to feel alive again, filled with the sound of laughter, the smell of butter, the clatter of utensils. It was as if time had folded in on itself, bringing me back to the years when this same kitchen was full of life. When the pie went into the oven, Clara leaned against the counter, watching the clock. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was little, I used to think you could fix anything, Mom. Burnt dinner, broken toy, bad day, you always found a way." I smiled softly. I wish that were true. She turned to me, her voice low. It was true for me. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The words caught in my throat, heavy with emotion. Then I reached out and squeezed her hand. "And I still would, sweetheart. I'd fix every hurt if I could." When the pie was done, Jacob insisted we all taste it together. He handed me the first slice, his eyes bright. "Grandma, it tastes like hugs," he said. Claire laughed, brushing his hair from his forehead. "It does, doesn't it?" That night, after they left, I stood by the door for a while, looking out at the street where their car had disappeared. I felt the stillness settle in again, but this time it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful, full of something I hadn't felt in so long: hope. As the days passed, our visits became regular. Sunday dinners, midweek calls, sometimes just short text about simple things, like, "Made soup today." "Jacob lost a tooth." "Mom, do you remember that old Christmas song you used to hum?" Bit by bit, we stitched the torn fabric of our relationship back together, not with grand apologies or perfect words, but with small moments. Laughter over coffee, shared silence when words weren't needed, the warmth of being understood again. Then, one snowy evening in December, Claire called me out of the blue. "Mom, we're doing Christmas dinner at my place this year," she said, her voice soft. "And I want you to come early, not late, not after everyone has eaten. Early, please." My heart skipped. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I'm sure," she said. "Jacob wants you to read him that Christmas story you always told me, the one about the little bird who found its way home." I smiled through tears. "I'll be there." That night, I sat by the window again, watching snowflakes fall like tiny feathers from the sky. The world outside was cold, but my heart was warm. Because love, even love that's been bruised, stretched thin, and nearly broken, has a way of finding its way home, just like that little bird in the story. And I realized then, forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It heals it.
Christmas morning arrived wrapped in a gentle hush, the kind that makes you pause before you even open your eyes. I could hear the faint crackle of my old heater and the distant chime of a church bell somewhere in town. I'd been awake since dawn, not out of restlessness, but anticipation. It had been years since I'd been invited to spend Christmas with my family, properly, without hesitation or conditions. I got dressed carefully, like it was a sacred occasion. I wore my soft maroon sweater, the one Claire had given me long ago, and tied my hair into a bun. I packed a small box of cookies I'd baked the night before, Jacob's favorite chocolate chip ones, and wrapped them in brown paper tied with a bit of ribbon. Then I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "It's just family, your family." The air outside was crisp and cold, my breath visible in tiny clouds as I stepped toward the cab waiting at the end of the street. I watched the houses pass by, roofs blanketed in snow, wreaths hanging from every door.
children pulling sleds, with laughter trailing behind them. Every sight tugged at a memory. When I arrived at Claire's house, I stood on the porch for a moment before knocking. There was a time when I could walk right in, when this house had been filled with my laughter too. But now, I hesitated. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorbell. Before I could press it, the door swung open. Jacob stood there, his little face lighting up the gray morning. "Grandma!" he shouted, throwing his arms around me so hard I almost dropped the cookie box. "Careful, careful," I said, laughing as I hugged him back. "You'll make me drop your treats." He grinned. "Mom, Grandma's here." Claire appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. For a moment, I saw that familiar flicker in her eyes, a mix of guilt and love and something unspoken. But then she smiled, really smiled, and said, "Mom, come in, it's freezing." Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine. The tree sparkled in the corner, ornaments catching the light like tiny stars. For a moment, I stood there just taking it in, the warmth, the color, the sound of laughter drifting from the other room where her husband, Michael, was setting the table. "Mrs. Turner," he greeted warmly, "glad you could make it." "Thank you for having me," I said, returning his kind smile. We all gathered around the table, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like I belonged again. Jacob sat next to me, proudly placing his napkin in his lap like a little gentleman. When we bowed our heads for grace, Claire hesitated before speaking. Then she reached for my hand. Her palm was warm against mine, trembling slightly. "Mom," she said softly, would you say the blessing?" My throat tightened. For years, I'd said grace at every holiday meal, until that stopped too. I took a breath, squeezed her hand, and nodded. Of course. I looked around the table at the faces I loved, older, wiser, a little changed, but still my family, and I began, "Dear Lord, thank you for this meal and for the love that surrounds us today. Thank you for the chance to come home, even if it took a little longer than we planned. Help us to keep forgiveness in our hearts and gratitude on our tongues. Amen." When I looked up, Claire's eyes were wet. She mouthed a quiet thank you. The meal was beautiful. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, sweet carrots glazed with honey. Jacob chattered endlessly, telling me about school, his friends, his favorite teacher. Every time he laughed, Claire looked at him the way I used to look at her, like he was her whole world. After dinner, Claire pulled me aside to the living room. The lights from the tree cast soft glows across her face. "Mom," she began, her voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." I felt my heart skip. "What is it, sweetheart?" She took a breath. "Last Thanksgiving, when I told you to eat early and stay in your room, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought keeping things calm meant keeping control. But I see now it wasn't control. It was fear. I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, of making the day worse. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to handle all the noise, all the stress, and I took it out on you." Her voice cracked on that last word. I felt the sting of tears in my own eyes, but I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I realized something that day," she continued. "When I was little, I always ran to you when I felt scared or tired. And somehow, growing up, I stopped doing that. I started thinking I had to be the strong one, that needing you made me weak. But I miss needing you, Mom. I miss us." That broke something open in me, something I'd been holding tight for too long. I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. "Oh, honey, you never stopped needing me, and I never stopped being here." We stood there for a long while, just holding each other, and the years of misunderstanding melting away. Later that night, when I got home, I placed a single candle on my windowsill, something I hadn't done since Claire moved out years ago. It was a little tradition I started when she was young. I'd light it whenever she was away, a silent wish for her safety and happiness. As the flame flickered softly against the glass, I realized I didn't need to keep wishing anymore. She was home, not just in her house, but in my heart again. And that night, for the first time in many years, I slept peacefully. Not as a lonely mother longing for her family, but as a woman who had finally found her way back to love. The next morning, sunlight poured through my kitchen window, filling the room with a golden glow. I sat with my cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a whisper of hope. Everything felt lighter, softer. Even the silence seemed kind now. It was strange, after so many lonely mornings, to finally wake up with a sense of peace instead of ache. I kept replaying Claire's words in my mind. "I miss needing you, Mom." Those words healed something deep inside me, something I didn't even know was still bleeding. Just as I was about to take another sip, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a video call from Claire. My heart jumped a little. She hadn't called like this in years. I swiped to answer, and there she was, her hair tied up in a messy bun, flour dusting her cheeks, and Jacob standing beside her with a big grin. "Good morning, Grandma," he shouted. "Guess what? We're making pancakes, and Mom says we need your secret ingredient." I laughed. The sound surprising even me. "Ah, the secret ingredient. Well, that depends. Are you making them with love?" He giggled. "Of course." "Then you already have the secret," I said. Claire laughed softly. "You always used to say that," she said. I didn't realize until now how much it meant. For the next 10 minutes, I watched them cook. Jacob stirring too hard, flour flying everywhere, Claire pretending to scold him while laughing the entire time. It was such a simple thing, yet I couldn't stop smiling. There was warmth between us again. Not forced or careful, just natural. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, thinking about how fragile love can be when we stop tending to it. Families don't fall apart all at once. They crumble, quietly, in small moments when we choose silence over truth, distance over understanding. And just as quietly, they can be rebuilt. One word, one hug, one morning call at a time. Later that day, I decided to take a walk to the park. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and coffee from a nearby cafe. I passed by families playing in the snow, their laughter echoing in the air, and I thought about how different I used to feel seeing that, how envious I was of strangers who seemed to have what I lost. But now, instead of envy, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, for small, mended things. I sat on a bench, watching the sunlight sparkle off the frozen pond. A young woman nearby was struggling with her toddler, trying to tie the little one's hat as he squirmed away. She looked up, met my eyes, and smiled apologetically. "They never sit still, do they?" she said, laughing. I smiled back. "No, they don't. But someday, you'll miss that." She laughed again, but her expression softened as she looked at her child. "You're probably right." When she walked away, I thought about how many mothers must have stood where I was, older, wiser, carrying years of laughter and regret. Maybe that's what aging is, learning to forgive not just others, but yourself for all the times you didn't know better. That evening, I got another message, this time from Michael. It read, "Thank you for coming yesterday. Claire really needed it." I think we all did. I stared at those words for a while before replying, "Family always needs each other. Sometimes we just forget how much." The next week, something beautiful happened. Claire called again, this time asking if I could come over for Sunday dinner. a tradition we hadn't shared in nearly 8 years. My heart swelled. When I arrived, the house felt different. Lighter, warmer. There were family photos on the wall I hadn't seen before, and one of them was new. Me, Claire, and Jacob from Christmas Day, all smiling. I hadn't realized she'd taken that photo. Jacob ran up to me with a drawing in his hands. "I made this for you, Grandma," he said proudly. I unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under a big red heart. He had written in his uneven handwriting, "Me plus Mom plus Grandma equals family." I couldn't speak for a moment. I pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. "It's perfect," I whispered. Clara stood by the doorway, watching quietly. I could see in her eyes that she was remembering too, the times she'd drawn me pictures just like that when she was little. Dinner that night was simple but full of laughter. We talked about everything: old memories, new plans, even the silly things we used to fight about. Every laugh felt like a brick placed back into the home we'd once torn down. After Jacob went to bed, Claire poured us both some tea. "Mom," she said, looking at me thoughtfully, "you know, when I told you last year to stay in your room, I thought I was protecting myself. But now, I see I was shutting out the very person who taught me what love really means." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We all hurt the ones we love sometimes, sweetheart. What matters is that we find our way back." She smiled through her tears. I think we finally did. As I left that night, the stars were bright against the winter sky. I stood for a moment before getting into the cab, looking up at them. Each one seemed to shimmer with its own quiet forgiveness, its own story. And as the car pulled away, I realized that maybe this was what grace really looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect endings, but the small, ordinary moments when love chooses to begin again. Time has a quiet way of softening even the deepest wounds. The months that followed became some of the most peaceful of my life, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally stopped expecting it to be. Claire and I talked often now. Sometimes it was a quick check-in after work. Other times it was long, meandering conversations about life, parenting, and how strange it felt to grow older. There was still an occasional sting, moments when a word or memory brushed against an old bruise, but instead of letting it reopen, we let it rest. Jacob, now 6, had become my little sunshine. Every weekend, he'd video call me, sometimes showing me his school projects, sometimes just to tell me that his tooth had fallen out. Once, he called in the middle of dinner, holding up a plate of spaghetti. "Look, Grandma, I made this myself," with Mom's help, of course. I laughed. "That looks delicious. Did you save me some?" He grinned. "No, but I'll make you more next time you come." Every time he said next time, it filled me with something warm and fragile. Hope. Because years ago, next time had stopped existing between me and my daughter. We lived in a silence so heavy, it almost erased our tomorrows. But now, our days had meaning again. One Sunday afternoon, I visited Claire's house. Jacob ran to the door as soon as I rang the bell, his little hands tugging me inside before I could even take off my coat. "Grandma, guess what? We planted a tree." He pulled me into the backyard, and there it was, a young sapling, thin but full of promise, standing proudly in the soil. Claire followed behind, smiling softly. "He wanted to plant it for you," she said. "He says it's our forever tree." I knelt beside Jacob and touched the small trunk. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "You know, if we take care of it, it'll grow big and strong, just like you." He nodded seriously. "Mom said trees are like families. If we water them with love, they don't fall apart." For a second, I couldn't breathe. That was something I had once told Claire when she was his age. I looked up at her. She was watching me, eyes shining. He gets that from you, she said softly. As the weeks turned into months, the sapling grew, and so did our bond. We started having Sunday dinners regularly, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. There were new traditions: baking cookies, watching old family movies, taking long walks through the park.
But there was one thing that still haunted me: my late husband. Claire rarely spoke about him, and I never asked. The years between his death and our reconciliation had been tangled in unspoken pain. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I decided it was time. "Claire," I said quietly, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, sipping her tea. "Do you ever think about your father?" Her eyes softened. "Every day," she said. "For a long time, I blamed you for everything that went wrong, for not trying harder, for letting him leave when things got bad." I felt that familiar guilt rise, but I didn't interrupt. She continued, "But now I realize you were just doing the best you could. He was lost in his own battles. We both were. I think I needed someone to blame, and you were the easiest target." I swallowed hard. "I never stopped loving him. Or you." "I know, Mom," she whispered. "And I never stopped loving you either. I was just too hurt to admit it." Silence stretched between us, not the cold silence of the past, but a healing one, the kind that comes when all the words that needed to be said have finally found their way out. She reached over and took my hand. "Do you know what Jacob told me the other day?" she said, smiling faintly. "He said, when Grandma comes, the house feels happy." Tears blurred my vision. "That's because he's a smart boy," I said softly. That night, after they dropped me home, I stood by my window and looked at the stars again. I thought about the tree in their backyard, small, fragile, but growing a little taller each day. Maybe families were like that too. Maybe we're not meant to be perfect or unbreakable. Maybe we're just meant to keep growing, together, even if we've been broken once before. As I turned off the light and climbed into bed, a deep calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of the past or fear the future. I simply slept, knowing that love, like that young tree, would keep growing long after I was gone. A few weeks later, while helping Claire clean out her attic, I stumbled upon an old, dust-covered box tucked behind some holiday decorations. She was busy sorting through Jacob's baby clothes, so I quietly lifted the box and opened it. Inside were faded photographs, letters, and a few journals I hadn't seen in years. My heart skipped a beat. They were mine, letters I'd written during the years when she refused to speak to me, letters I'd mailed but had been returned unopened. For a moment, I just stared at them. The sight of my own handwriting, the loops, the smudged ink, the tear stains, brought back the ache of those lonely nights. I could almost hear the sound of the rain outside my window, the silence in the kitchen where I used to sit, writing to a daughter who wanted nothing to do with me. I held one letter gently, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The envelope was dated 5 years ago, Thanksgiving Day. I remembered that one vividly. It was the night I'd sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chairs, wondering if she and Jacob were somewhere laughing without me. Before I could say anything, Claire noticed me holding the letter. Her face froze, then softened. She walked over slowly and sat beside me. "I found that box when we moved," she said quietly. "I couldn't bring myself to open it back then. It hurt too much." I nodded, my throat tight. "May I?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Please." I carefully unfolded the letter. My hands trembled as I began to read. "Dear Claire, it's Thanksgiving again. I made too much food, like I always do.
I don't know if you're celebrating today or if Jacob is big enough to understand what the holiday means, but I hope you're both happy. I hope you're surrounded by warmth, even if it's not mine. I just wanted you to know that not a day goes by when I don't think of you. I forgive everything, even the things you think I can't. I just wish you'd call, just once. Love, Mom. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking. I folded the letter back up carefully, pressing it to my chest as if I could somehow hold my past a little tighter, a little longer. Claire was crying quietly beside me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I was angry at you for so long, and I thought ignoring you would make it easier, but I kept every single one of those letters. I couldn't throw them away." I reached for her hand. "You don't have to apologize anymore, sweetheart. We both carried enough pain for 2 lifetimes. I just never stopped hoping one day you'd read them." "I did," she said, smiling through tears. "Last year, after Jacob asked me why I never talk about my grandma, I sat down one night and read every single one. That's when I realized how wrong I'd been, how much love I'd turned away from."
For a long while, neither of us spoke. The attic was quiet, except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere downstairs. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window, landing on the old box, illuminating the past that once tore us apart, now binding us together again. Finally, Claire looked at me and said, "I think it's time we write a new letter. Together." I smiled, not fully understanding, until she brought out a clean sheet of paper and a pen. She placed it between us and said, "Let's write one for Jacob, something he can read when he's older, so he'll never forget what love looks like, even when it's messy, even when it's late." My heart swelled. We began writing slowly, each taking turns adding a line. It wasn't poetic or perfect, but it was real. "Dear Jacob, families aren't always easy. Sometimes we hurt the ones we love the most, not because we stop caring, but because we're lost in our own pain. If you ever find yourself angry at someone you love, remember that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the bridge that brings hearts home again. Love, Mom and Grandma." When we finished, Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box. "One day," she said softly, "when he's ready, I'll give it to him." I looked at her, my eyes wet with pride. "And when he reads it," I said, "he'll understand that love, no matter how broken, can always find its way back." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about that box again. It wasn't just filled with letters. It was filled with years of love that never gave up. Maybe that's what motherhood is, I thought. Loving through silence, through distance, through pain. Holding on even when no one's reaching back. That next Thanksgiving felt different from the very start. The air carried a quiet kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Not the kind that comes from perfection, but the kind that settles in when you've finally stopped running from your own heart. I woke up early that morning, before the sun had even risen. The house was still, but warm, filled with that familiar scent of cinnamon, butter, and coffee. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't cooking out of habit or loneliness. I was cooking with love again. The turkey sat in the oven, already browning, and Claire had left a note on the counter that read, "Don't start without us. We're bringing the pie." I smiled at that little note. Just a few years ago, the thought of Thanksgiving had felt unbearable, a reminder of rejection, of being unwanted at my own family's table. But now, as I stood there stirring the gravy, I felt gratitude, not just for what I had regained, but for the lessons I had learned in losing it. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I peeked through the window and saw Claire stepping out of the car, holding a pumpkin pie in one hand and Jacob's small mittened hand in the other.
He spotted me and waved so enthusiastically that his little hat nearly fell off. My heart melted right there. When they walked through the door, the house filled instantly with laughter and the smell of cold air and cinnamon. Jacob ran straight to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Grandma," he said breathlessly, "Mom said I can help you mash the potatoes this year." "Well then," I said, pretending to whisper, "I suppose that means you're my new sous chef." He grinned proudly and followed me into the kitchen. As I handed him the masher, I glanced at Claire. She stood by the counter, watching us with a soft smile. There was a kind of peace in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a child, before life and anger built walls between us. We cooked together that morning, side by side. She basted the turkey while I seasoned the vegetables, and Jacob insisted on taste testing the mashed potatoes every 5 minutes. Every now and then our eyes met, not with the awkwardness of old wounds, but with the comfort of a bond rebuilt. When everything was finally ready, we set the table together. It wasn't grand or fancy, just simple, with mismatched plates, a faded tablecloth, and a few candles flickering in the center. But to me, it was perfect. Before we began eating, Claire cleared her throat. "Mom," she said softly, "Jacob and we have something for you." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a drawing, crayon-colored, messy, and beautiful. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small. Above them, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Our Family Thanksgiving." Tears filled my eyes as I held that picture. "It's us," Jacob said proudly. "I drew it yesterday. Mommy said families don't have to be perfect, just together." I reached for him and pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "Your mommy is a very wise woman," I whispered. Then I looked at Claire. "And she gets that from her grandmother," I teased gently. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that made my chest ache with joy. Maybe she does. We sat down, bowed our heads, and held hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Claire said quietly, "This year, I'm thankful for forgiveness, for second chances, and for you, Mom." My voice trembled as I replied, "And I'm thankful that love always finds its way back home." We began to eat, and the room filled with the sound of laughter and conversation, the kind of sound that had been missing for far too long. Outside, the world was quiet, the sky brushed with gold and orange. Inside, the warmth of family wrapped around us like a long-forgotten blanket. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and Jacob had fallen asleep on the couch, Claire and I sat together by the fireplace. The flames flickered softly, casting a warm glow over her face. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "for years, I thought Thanksgiving was about food and tradition. But now I think it's about forgiveness, about being brave enough to come back even when it hurts." I nodded slowly, "And about letting go even when it still hurts." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I think we both learned that." We sat there for a while, saying nothing more. Words weren't needed anymore. The past had already spoken, and we had finally listened. That night, as I tucked a blanket over Jacob and turned off the lights, I looked around the room, at the pictures on the walls, at the warmth glowing from the hearth, at the peace that finally lived in this home again, and I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for the years lost, for the tears shed, for the love that never stopped trying. When I woke up the next morning, the house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock and the distant hum of the heater, the kind of stillness that wraps around you after a day full of love. I sat up slowly, letting the warmth of the blanket linger a little longer, thinking about the night before, the laughter, the forgiveness, the simple joy of having my daughter and grandson under the same roof again. For years, I thought forgiveness was something you gave only when someone asked for it. But life, as it turns out, doesn't always give you those chances neatly wrapped in apologies. Sometimes forgiveness is something you give to yourself, because holding on hurts too much. I went to the kitchen and started the coffee. The smell drifted through the air, the same way it used to when Claire was a teenager getting ready for school. Back then, she'd always come in sleepy-eyed, complaining that I'd woken her too early. I smiled to myself, remembering the way she'd sit at the counter, legs swinging, waiting for her toast to pop. Those little moments, the ones we take for granted, they're the real memories that never leave. I heard small footsteps behind me, then a sleepy voice. "Grandma," Jacob mumbled, rubbing his eyes, "is there any pie left?" I laughed softly. "There might be, if you can find it before your mommy wakes up." He grinned, instantly more awake, and ran to the fridge. Watching him, I felt something deep and peaceful stir inside me, a quiet knowing that despite everything, love had found its way through the cracks. A few minutes later, Claire joined us, still in her pajamas, her hair messy and eyes soft. She leaned against the doorway, watching Jacob eat pie for breakfast. "You spoil him," she teased. "Of course I do," I replied, sipping my coffee. "It's my job." She smiled, that same familiar curve of her lips I used to see when she was little. "You know, Mom," she said after a pause, "I was scared to come back here. I didn't know if you'd even want me to." I looked at her for a long moment. "Sweetheart, I never stopped wanting you to. I was just waiting for you to be ready." Her eyes filled with tears, and she crossed the room to hug me. It was the kind of hug that says everything words can't. Sorry, thank you, I missed you, I love you. We stood there for a long time, the morning light streaming through the window, wrapping us in gold. And in that moment, I realized that family isn't about perfect holidays, or matching table settings, or keeping traditions unbroken. It's about forgiveness, resilience, and the courage to start over. As the day went on, Claire and Jacob packed their things to head home. Before she left, Claire handed me a small box tied with a red ribbon. "Open it after we go," she said. When the car disappeared down the driveway, I sat at the table and untied the ribbon. Inside was a framed photo, the three of us from the night before, sitting at the table, smiling. Underneath it, in her handwriting, were the words, "Home isn't a place. It's the people who still love you, even after everything." Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from peace. That Thanksgiving had once been the day I was told to eat early and alone, the day my daughter's words broke my heart. But now it had become something entirely different. The same day, a few years later, became the moment love came full circle, where a family once broken found its way back together, not through perfection, but through understanding. If life has taught me anything, it's that no wound is too deep for love to heal. Sometimes it just takes time, and a heart willing to stay open even after it's been hurt. I don't know how many more Thanksgivings I'll see, but I do know this. I'll spend every one of them grateful for forgiveness, for family, and for the quiet miracle of second chances. And if you're listening to me now, wondering if it's too late to fix things, to say sorry, to reach out, it isn't. Love doesn't keep time the way we do. It waits, patiently. That's what I'll carry with me for the rest of my days.